And we are back in the studio. Earlier today, women voiced their opposition during a protest staged in front of the Polish parliament, where last week parliamentarians overthrew one of the bills intended to loosen abortion laws. Joining me now to talk about social and political impact of the abortion discussion in Poland is the founder of the women's strike and an activist, Marta Lempart. Thank you so much for joining me here to talk about this very important subject. So we've seen the strike taking place in front of the parliament here in Warsaw. We know that there was also a strike held in Szczecin.
In 7 cities, actually.
In seven cities, pardon me. What political consequences do you think this ongoing discussion is going to have on the parliament and the domestic politics in Poland? How do you think that this could affect the coalition?
I think that there are two or even three elements. One is that, and that's what I'm hoping for, that the Prime Minister will use the tools that he has. And we know that the tools that he has about PSL is the simplest one. All they care about is positions in government, is power, influence, and money. And all that it would take is losing one vice minister, one secretary of state, one state agency, one state fund, for them to keep voting with the government coalition. And this is the tools that Donald Tusk has, because I don't think anybody in Poland believes that they would actually leave the coalition, leave all those positions, all this influence, all this money. So I'm really disappointed Donald Tusk didn't use those tools before. He didn't communicate. If you do that, you will lose all the positions.
Do you think he's going to do that now? Is he going?
I'm hoping for that, because everybody knows that this is about this, and this is something that he can do. The second thing is, if it doesn't pass the parliament, the next bill or the next or whatever will be happening, we will still collect signatures under the civic bill to legalize abortion. That will be much farther going than the ones that they just dropped. And they will have to drop the civic bill, this democratic parliament, democratically elected parliament, people who want legal abortion. 90% of the voters of the government want legal abortion. So it will be much more difficult for them. And the next thing is that this is, it's really worrying for me, because with this shift against the voters, against the democratic voters, 78% of PSL voters want legal abortion. It means that they are actually going to lose the elections to PiS and Konfederacja, and that's scary. That's really scary, but that's how it will end, because people who voted in last elections, this additional 25% of the voters, young people and women, won't go out and vote.
But there is still time for things to be done. Do you think that there is an alternative scenario in which the current government is not going to take steps to change that because of some of the members of the coalition?
I think that they might try that. They might not do. Prime Minister might just not do anything, hoping that it will just cease and it will just die. And I'm surprised, because they've seen us fighting for 8 years. And I don't understand this idea that we will stop any day, that we will just stop at some point. We will never stop. We will always be there. We will always cause trouble. Presidential elections will be about abortion. We will make sure of that. And the parliamentary elections will be about abortion, and we will make sure of that. And everything else, whenever it will be possible, will be about abortion. We will make sure of that. So that's a really stupid thing politically, to think that at some point it will just die out.
So, as you mentioned before, before the elections, we heard from the Prime Minister, then the leader of the opposition, Mr. Tusk, promising to liberalize the abortion, to take a look at that. With women being upset and new signs of women being upset for certain actions not taking place, what is your agenda now in terms of? Is there going to be another women's protest? Are we going to expect an explosion of those in different cities across Poland?
We're expecting now the reaction. So we're expecting things, as I said, Prime Minister reacting to his coalition, voting with PiS and Konfederacja. Because what we're looking at is the party that is in government that is aligned now with the former government. So people who actually got the power on the backs of women who were beaten up by the police during the protests, now are in coalition with those who are responsible for women being attacked by the police at the protests. So this is like the biggest form of betrayal. So coalitions are not about who's signed something, the agreements. Coalitions are about who votes with whom. So I expect Donald Tusk to restore the government coalition that votes together and not tolerate this anti-women's rights, anti-human rights coalition, ex-government and the part of the new government, because they don't deserve it to be in this government if they... And I know that there's this whole blackmail story about PSL leaving the coalition. I don't think anybody in Poland believes that they will just give up on this power and this influence that they have. They will not. So this is the thing. The next thing is I expect bills on abortion to be still proceeded in the parliament, and we will be reacting to everything that will be happening around them. But we will also at some point start or at least announce collection of signatures under civic bill to legalize abortion. And this coalition will have to vote yes or no to a civic bill that will be supported by 90% of their voters.
Obviously, this is an incredibly important subject, and this is a subject of massive social discussion, not only in Poland but in other countries as well, including the U.S. ahead of the presidential elections.
Yes, in Poland it was in last elections. In Poland, abortion was the most important issue. Before that, it was 7th position. Now it was 2. It was 2nd, and we will keep it that way. It will be always the 1st or the 2nd element for people to go and vote or not.
So you mentioned, you said that you're going to wait for some amendments, you're going to wait for the parliament to come up with a new bill in terms of liberalizing abortion. Yes. What's the time frame on that? What's enough time? What's too much time, in your opinion?
I think the time until the end of the year for another bill to be at least voted in the parliament, so the work's finished and the voting, whether it will be depenalization or it will be legalization of abortion, that's the time. Because then we announce the collection and we just go with the collection of signatures into presidential campaign. So the candidate, whoever he will be from the government coalition, or the candidates will have to declare if they support the civic bill or not, if they will sign the civic bill or not. And we will do the whole electoral campaign about this.
So as we're looking at this subject, obviously it revolves around women. It's the women fighting, it's the women getting together. Is there any way in which you're approaching politicians of the coalition who are women themselves in order to talk about it, in order to put some possibly pressure, I suppose pressure would be a good word, to support you in that walk towards getting another bill through Parliament? Of course
there are politicians that it just doesn't make sense to talk to them. Because they are not Democrats. Like some of the politicians are not Democrats. And unfortunately, it also includes women who just don't care what their voters want. They don't want to listen. They don't care that they should represent their voters. And we will not just go into talks with someone who doesn't see that there are voters that they should represent. But of course, there are many women especially who change their minds, like women from Hołownia's party, for example, and 4 women politicians from PSL. So yeah, it works, but it takes a lot of time, and some people are just not willing to talk and listen at all, and we just won't ask and we won't beg, no.
Well, it's always, you know, diplomacy, the art of diplomacy and democracy, and marrying these two things together.
But not with people who are not Democrats, it's not. So people who know that their voters want legal abortion by 78% and decriminalization by about 90%, people who know that the voters of the government want legalization by 90%, and don't care about it at all. They don't care about their opinions, and they don't care. You cannot talk. You cannot convince someone who's not a Democrat.
I sympathize.
They should do something.
And I totally understand. You know, being a woman myself, I would like to. I would like to see people being involved with the subject, obviously. But this is also the power of democracy, as we speak about it. You have certain elections, and if there are people who want to be in power, they have to listen. Which takes me to my next question, because one of the major topics of discussion post-October parliamentary elections, which took place in 2023 here in Poland, was basically the subject of abortion and women actually going to voting polls and having a record-breaking frequency when it comes to showing at the voting polls in order to change what has been changed over the last 8 years.
That was 52%. into 75%. That's the difference between the elections in 2019 and 2020.
Obviously, and a lot of women that we heard from, even myself when I went to a voting poll, I listened to women talking, and we had a conversation, and they said, listen, this is why we're here, because there are so many things that we want to change about how, how we govern our bodies. And obviously, as I mentioned, we have a November election coming up in the US. We have Kamala Harris, who could potentially become the first female president of the United States. So that topic of abortion is important ahead of any election in most countries. Do you think that with the presidential elections coming up in a year's time, this is also going to be something that could potentially have an effect on how many people show up to the voting polls?
Absolutely, because politicians who want to install the ban forever, lying that it's the ban on abortion from 1993. They want to install the law from 1993 banning abortion. They are terrified of the subject, and they will lie and they will try to find their way out, not to answer the question. And there will be candidates, I hope, that they will declare that they will not veto the legalization. The funny thing is that it's actually their own trap, because they talk so much about nothing can be done until this president finishes his term, that they will lose this argument. So now they are talking about how it's impossible, it shouldn't be done at all. They will lose this argument during presidential elections. They will have to say yes or no. It will be harder to lie. So I'm just waiting for it. It will be a show.
I suppose you're very much looking forward to the presidential election.
Yes.
But until that happens, I think you, as many other women, are hoping for a bill coming through Parliament that is actually considering all the options that I just mentioned only a few minutes ago, that there is going to be change. Marta Lempart, activist and founder of the Women's Strike. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about this important subject.
Thank you.
Pleasure is all mine. And so, on this note, we are finishing today's World Context Talks. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Please stay tuned here on TVP World for more.